My starter is showing me that it's ready to go into a loaf of bread. I set the rubber band at the top of the starter each time I feed it, and I like to see it at least double before I use it. And you can see that it's not only double but nearly triple, and probably a little more because my container slopes out as the dough rises. So it's ready to go. I'm following a procedure that I used a few weeks ago that worked out well. This loaf earned my star of "It's good," and I'm repeating that. I'm starting out with 165 grams of water. I had been using 175. The last loaf I tried 165 and I thought I'd try it again. Now I want 50 grams of starter. Whoops, almost made a mistake. I want to zero that out. Now I'll put in 50 grams of starter. That way I don't have to do the math. I'll take 51, 52, that's fine. And I'll leave that out so I can give it some flour when I put the flour in here. I'm going to mix this up. Maybe take it off my scale. And zero this out again. I'm running low on flour. I want 250 grams of flour. And I'll give my starter a little flour. And I don't need my scales anymore, so. Put the salt in now. About a teaspoon. And I'll rinse out my bowl just because it's easier to rinse out than to completely scrape out. And that'll be it for now. Just let the dough sit through the afternoon, through a series of folds.
I like to rinse the bowl out so that it gives the dough anything to stick to.
And that's it. I'll just cover this up and let it sit for a couple hours and come and do my first fold. It's 10 after 3 and I mixed up this dough at 1:15, so it's been nearly 2 hours. And I'm gonna fold the dough. I use a spatula, and my goal is to make folds in the dough. I want to make multiple layers of dough to give the off gases from the sourdough yeast more places to be trapped so that it makes the dough rise more. And when I do this, my goal is to make the folds, but not knock any more gas out of the dough than I have to do this. I don't care to stretch the dough. I've done that, but I don't think that's the way to go now. So I just do some folds. I do a kind of a counterclockwise motion. Kind of wrap the dough around my thumb. And that's it. The dough's already smoother, silkier. It was kind of lumpy before because I didn't mix it very well. But it's coming together, and that's it. And I'll do this 2 or 3 more times the rest of today. It's nearly 6 o'clock, and this will be fold number 2. Normally I do this a little more frequently. I just haven't been getting to it today. Okay, so it's almost 8:30. Give the dough another fold. You can see that the dough is obviously swollen up. It's fluffier than it started out. This will be my 4th and final fold for the night. Notice how the dough quivers when I shake it. It's kind of like jello. The dough's a lot fluffier. You can see big bulges around my thumb where bubbles are coming up. Lots of gas in this dough. I'm trying not to knock any more of the gas out than I have to, just trying to wrap the dough around my thumb. Then I'll put it away for the night. This hairnet will keep it from drying out tonight. And we'll catch up with it in the morning. Good morning. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll take a look at what we've got here. Oh yeah. I don't know if you can remember what the dough looked like when I first mixed it up in there, but it was less than half that size. The natural yeast has been doing its job. And what I want to do now is get the dough out of the glass bowl into a floured basket that the dough can proof in. To its final shape. And I'll put it in the oven in a few more hours. My goal here is to get the dough out of the bowl without knocking the air out of it. I'm still going to fold it a little bit, and the folding is primarily to tighten up the outside of the bottom side of the dough. But if I can do it without flattening it, that's what I'll do. I'll lose some of the gas, but I don't want to lose all of it. You see the dough's real bubbly, real silky, real fluffy. That's my cue that it's ready for the final proofing. It probably won't be long. We'll see if I can get it out of there now. I like to flour my fingers. Give it just a little more surface tension and bring its bottom together. This will be the bottom of the loaf on top. I'll turn the basket upside down, put it on my pizza pan and bake it. And that's all I need to do for now. And this will be a great cover. This envelops the entire basket. And I won't touch this again until I'm right at about the 22-24 hour mark for all the fermentation. And then I'll pop it in the oven. Okay, it's going on 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I mixed the dough up yesterday at 1:15 p.m. So this dough has been fermenting for over 24 hours, 25 and a half hours. That's longer than I usually go. Doesn't look like it's, well, it looks like it may have sagged a little bit here. And this behaves just like the starter. It grows aggressively, all fluffy and domed in the middle. And then after a point, the yeast starts to recede after it's eaten all the food that's available to it. So this may be a little bit old, but that's all right. It'll just have a little more sourdough flavor. Probably won't get as much oven spring out of it. This is a little $44.88 toaster oven at Walmart. And the trick with a toaster oven, especially one this small, is not letting the dough rise into the burners, the elements up here, and I've done that. When you drop the tray down to the lowest level, it's real close to these burners, or these elements. So that's been an issue that I've been working around. This oven came with a little crumb tray. It also works to put water in to add moisture for baking. I've done that. I can either put water in the tray or I can use a cover, and I've just been using the cover. So I put the tray as low as it will go, and then I manufactured a piece of tin foil that just fits the inside of the oven. So the heat has to hit this crumb tray first, and then it's blocked by this shelf that I've made. This was originally an aluminum or a tin foil turkey pan that came with a turkey at the grocery store, and I just flattened it out, folded over the edges to fit the inside of my oven. So the heat from the elements has two things blocking it. In addition, I turned my pizza pan upside down so there's a dead air space between my little shelf and the pizza pan, and that's been working to keep the bottom of my bread from burning. So I'm going to add a little rice flour to the bottom of this pan. The rice flour works great for keeping things from sticking. And notice how it doesn't fall off when I turn the pan upside down. A little bit here. Set it on the dough. I like to see if it's centered. When I turn the whole works over, dropping the dough on the bottom of my pizza pan. It's sticking a little bit. Not bad. I'll let that air dry. I don't bother cutting my dough. I just found that it's not necessary. I cover it with a bowl because it's the only thing I've got that I can fit in there. In the big oven, I'll use one of my cast iron pots to bake bread in, but in the toaster oven, I'm making do with what fits in here. So I'll just put it inside, crank it all the way up, 450 degrees, bake setting, and I go 45 degrees. Like that. And that's it. I'll come back in 45 minutes. The oven will ding and I'll know it's ready. If I catch it, I'll go ahead and take the bowl off 5 or 10 minutes before the oven shuts off. It's not an easy task when that bowl's hot. The bowl doesn't have a handle and it's slippery. If I think about it, I take it off. If I don't, the loaf's still fine. And I'll come back when it's cooked. There's about 10 minutes left on the timer here, and I thought I'd take a look at this loaf and see how it's coming along. Oh, that's already got plenty of color in it. I may not let this go the 10 more minutes. Let's take a better look here. Looks like the bread made it up to the top of the bowl, and its rise was limited by the headspace of the bowl. Ooh, that's hot even through the pad. One time I just had a hot pad like this, and when I turned the bowl over, I got a nasty burn across my knuckles from the steam rising. So I'm gun shy with these hot bowls. They're dangerous. So I'm not going to give this the full 10 minutes. It doesn't need it. So I'll change, I'm going to just put it in the oven and give it maybe a minute or two for that little extra crunchiness. And I'm going to change this only 35 minutes. That's not real consistent. I don't know. You know, I dropped my water content. I was using 175 grams of water in the loaves previous to this. The one just before this was 165 and it was overdone. I still enjoyed it. It was good tasting bread. The bottom was a little overdone. This one's also 165 instead of 175 with the same 250 grams of flour and 50 grams of starter. So it's that extra 10 grams of water that's making 10 minutes of difference in the cooking time. I'll try to come back after it's cooled and we'll take a look at it. So let's take a look at this loaf now that it's cooled off. You can see how the texture, the normal texture around here, was smushed right in here and actually overcooked a little more. See if you can see it in the light. And that's because this part of the bread right here smushed up against my cover as it was baking. The bottom of my bowl is flat, so that flattened out my loaf. I need to find a bowl that is about 4.5 inches deep. This one's only 3 inches deep and about 9 inches wide, and I'll be in business. This is working fair, but I can improve on my method. So you can see that the crust is not burnt. It's crunchy. Has a good sound. So does the rest of the bread. It's all crunchy. I love that. Go ahead and cut it open and see what the crumb looks like. Yeah, it's fairly homogeneous. There's no big bubbles, in one section of the bread and then dents in the other. It's pretty consistent throughout, and it's risen throughout. So I'd call this a good loaf of bread. I'll enjoy eating it. Recall the last loaf that I made was the one that the dough rose and pressed against the bottom of my cover, my glass bowl cover. It was a good loaf. So I mixed up another batch of dough and I tried to do it identically to the last one. Same ingredients, same environmental conditions, with one exception. This loaf went 25 and a half hours, and this loaf will be just over 23 hours. So a little bit of difference in the total fermentation time, but not much difference. But I'm not going to use the bowl this time. I'm going to set the oven up a little different. Still going to use my pizza pan upside down. Still going to use my handmade shelf made out of tin foil, stiff tin foil. I actually used tin foil for a while, but I had to keep replacing it as it wore out. I'm going to put water in my crumb tray in my toaster oven. Recall these burners down here are so close to the bottom of the loaf that the bottom of my loaf gets burnt. So I have this method that I showed you earlier. This time I'm not going to use the bowl for the crust, but I am going to put 3/4 of a cup of water in the crumb tray. And the steam that generates should keep the it should keep the crust from solidifying and forming a helmet that prevents the oven spring. Here's another example of the top of the crust hardening too fast, leaving a helmet that lifts the softer dough underneath, so the bottom of the loaf slopes inwards. Here is another example of a helmet loaf with the telltale sign of the tapered bottom. I think you can use either method, either steam, that's the way a lot of professional bakers do it. They have ovens that inject steam early on, or use a cover. A lot of people use, including myself, a lot of people use a cast iron bowl in a larger oven to do the same thing. So we'll see how this works using the steam. Now, I think the steam also helps prevent the bottom of my crust from overcooking. Knowing that water can only get to 212 degrees, water or steam, unless it's pressurized, that should keep the bottom of my loaf cooler for a while until all the steam has evaporated. Then the bottom will heat up with the rest of it. But the primary reason I'm using the water is so that the crust on the dough doesn't solidify too soon. So we'll go ahead and get this in the oven, and then we'll take a look at it when it's cooked. Putting a little rice flour on. Now, last time I put this on. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put the dough in my cold oven. 450 degrees, bake. And I learned that I only need 35 minutes. I learned that with the last loaf because I dropped the water level, the amount of water down to 165 grams instead of 175, and that reduced the cooking time by 10 minutes. So we'll see what happens with this experiment. We'll come back here in about 35 minutes and see what this loaf looks like, cooking it with steam instead of a cover. The steam is just pouring out of this little toaster oven. Let's see how long it'll last. The toaster oven's bell just went off. Sure smells good. Take a look at it here. Whoops, too far. Oh, that's a handsome little loaf. I'll come back in a little bit after it's cooled down so I can handle it and take a look at the crumb. Okay, let's take a look at this handsome little loaf of bread cooked with steam instead of a cover. I can see where the burner in my toaster oven was too close to the bread. The bottom is soft. The bottom is softer than when I cooked without the water. So the water does mediate the temperature. I saw steam coming out of the little oven for about 10 minutes after I turned it on. So while the rest of the bread was getting 35 minutes of full heat, the bottom got less. Oh, that's a nice loaf. So either the bowl or steam works. I've tried a steel bowl as my cover, but it didn't work. Apparently the stainless steel gets too hot too fast, or something's wrong with the heat transfer, the thermodynamics, because I was left with a loaf where the crust had about a half-inch gap. I could stick my finger in here between the crumb and the crust. It was like the crust got hot real fast and rose faster than the crumb did. So that doesn't work. It's about the right height. It's deeper than my glass bowl. So I want to find a glass bowl shaped about like this. And I guess that's about it. I hope you caught on to how I'm trying to learn sourdough. I think that keeping notes on each loaf is a good move because you can compare exactly what you did. It's hard to remember a loaf 3 or 4 loaves ago what you did. This will get my star of approval, my star of it tastes good, with a note that I got pretty darn close to the burner in the oven here. Not the burner, the heating element. So I hope you found something useful. We'll catch you later.